Good evening. I'm Danny Baker, General Manager of KTBC FOX 7. The date was November 28, 1952, when a flickering black and white image of a live University of Texas football game began broadcasting over the airwaves of Austin. Television in Central Texas was born. Over the next hour, we'll look back at the rich history of our station, our city, and the wonderful characters who call Austin home. It's a story of growth, change, tragedy, and triumph. This is Fox 7 at 50, and it all began with a very special woman known as Lady Bird.
We loved Austin. We wanted to make it as strong and full of opportunities, and we wanted to see it grow and flourish and have a hand in that growth and flourishing.
In the winter of 1942, Claudia Alta Johnson decides to jump into the new and exciting world of broadcasting, a world run mostly by men. Lady Bird begins her journey in Austin, Texas. She lays the groundwork for what becomes a leading influence in Central Texas media, working as president and later chairman of the board of the Texas Broadcasting Company. Using $41,000 she inherits from her mother, Lady Bird focuses her sights on KTBC, a small radio station broadcasting from downtown Austin. She sees the station isn't in good financial shape and sets out to turn it around with hard work and savvy business sense. The cards are stacked against her. The previous year, the station had lost $7,500 and debts reached nearly $20,000. The station had a weak broadcasting signal, only 250 watts. But Mrs. Johnson presses on.
My father believed that any woman with 2 degrees from the best university in the whole world, which of course from his point of view, the University of Texas, could do anything. And after all, Mother had a degree in journalism, and so therefore she ought to be able to run a radio station. Now, my mother was much more of a realist. She recognized that the radio station was not making any money and was in very dismal physical plant, and she knew that she was up against a lot.
In spring of 1943, the FCC grants Mrs. Johnson her license. Lady Bird is listed as the sole buyer. Next, she gets to work on the books and discovers KTBC is losing $600 a month. Lady Bird quickly makes staffing changes and, working with assistant Louise Vine, sets out to turn KTBC around.
My impression of her was, one, she was a person that knew just how to take hold. The station, the facilities were really quite dirty, if you will. And one of the first things she did was she asked me if I would be agreeable to help her clean it up. So we scrubbed the floors and the walls and the windows and got it really sparkling clean.
The hard work pays off. Within 6 months, KTBC becomes Austin's CBS affiliate, doubles its broadcasting power, switches its frequency, and reports its first monthly profit, $18. The next few years bring more growth to the tiny station. By 1945, KTBC increases its broadcasting power to 5,000 watts, acquires a much larger audience, and makes an after-tax profit of nearly $40,000. The First Lady of Texas Broadcasting had turned the fledgling radio station around. In 1952, with 2 small daughters and a husband in the U.S. Senate, Lady Bird enters the world of television, expanding KTBC's audience. She applies for a VHF signal license and is granted one by the FCC. History is made on Thanksgiving Day, 1952. KTBC TV, Channel 7, gives Austin its first televised broadcast, the annual Longhorn Aggies football game. For those of you keeping score, UT won 32-12. Austin had 2 reasons to rejoice that day.
I remember how tall the tower was, how I was impressed by it. I thought, isn't this good timing when a most important football game, the heart, the throb of Austin, is taking place?
Lady Bird's Texas Broadcasting Company is now a certified success, but she doesn't stop there. In 1950, she gambles again with radio's newest innovation, FM. Most folks don't have FM receivers, but Mrs. Johnson believes that a signal free of interference is the future of radio. she'd write again, and what is now known as KLBJ-FM is born. Today, KLBJ Radio is still on the air. It's been on the air longer than any FM station in Austin. Over decades, Mrs. Johnson's broadcast holdings expand as she buys interests in other stations across the state of Texas. At each of her stations, Mrs. Johnson promoted the local involvement and community service that marks her own family's public career and distinguishes broadcasters from other communications media. This evening, we honor Lady Bird Johnson for her pioneering achievements in radio and television. We're proud to call her the true First Lady of Texas broadcasting.
She set the example. She's a wordsmith by nature, a hard worker. You will reap the harvest that you've sown. And she set an example for me in showing me that you will find your business as rewarding as you are willing to supply it with your own blood, sweat, and tears.
Hello, I'm Dick Ellis. During KTBC's first 6 months of broadcasting, we had no real studio space to speak of. The on-air staff worked with a single camera, shooting into a cramped corner of our broadcast tower facilities atop Mount Larson. As the station took off, the Johnson family soon realized that a new home with more space was needed, and fast. Lady Bird and Lyndon decided to lease some space in one of their favorite buildings in downtown Austin. The beautiful and historic Driscoll Hotel, the site, by the way, of the couple's first date. The Driscoll was home for 9 fruitful years until 1962, when further growth prompted KTBC to move down the street and into our current home at 10th and Brazos. Today, the Driscoll has been fully renovated and is more beautiful than ever before. Driscoll General Manager Jeff Trigger explains how this hotel has seen a lot of firsts during its 116-year history.
One of the things that makes the Driscoll so special is that it's been the home of so many firsts in Texas. Not only the first Texas president elected, but the first interstate telephone calls were made from here, hotels with electricity, so many firsts. And one of the most special is the fact that the first television station, KTBC, was located here at the Driscoll, and it makes it very special for us.
As you've seen, KTBC has been serving Central Texas longer than any other station in the area. Signing on the air Thanksgiving Day 1952, the station has been through a lot of changes to bring us where we are today. For 7 years, KTBC remained the only station in Central Texas choosing programs from ABC, NBC, and CBS. Eventually, the station became a CBS affiliate and kept that affiliation for nearly 40 years. In 1994, an industry-changing event took place when 10 TV stations in top markets all over the country, including KTBC, were sold to the innovative Fox network. In 1995, KTBC began airing Fox programming. Phones had to be manned 24 hours a day to help alleviate the confusion spurred by the transition. The new network produced hit programs like Beverly Hills 90210, Melrose Place, and of course, television's longest-running animated series, The Simpsons. Fox continued to shake up the sitcom world with shows like Married with Children and the hour-long comedy series Ally McBeal. Just this past season, Fox struck gold again with the high-action drama 24. In the era of reality TV, Fox produced Temptation Island and the extremely popular American Idol, which propelled Texan Kelly Clarkson to TV and radio fame. Be sure to look for another season of American Idol this January. And of course, stay tuned to KTBC FOX 7 for more distinctively Fox programming in the years to come. With the growing success of the network, our news programming, and the syndicated shows, we look forward to serving Central Texas citizens for decades to come.
Good evening. One of history's worst mass murders occurred here in Austin today. By official count tonight, 49 persons were hit by gunfire. There are 16 dead and 33 injured.
On a hot August 1st, 1966, Charles Whitman climbed to the top of the UT Tower, armed with an arsenal of high-powered rifles, and opened fire. Neil Spells, a young KTBC News reporter, made his national reputation that day as Channel 7 covered the story. To mark our 50th anniversary, Neil returned with me to some of the exact spots on the university campus where KTBC reporters and cameramen risked their lives to cover the story.
How many have you seen that are dead today?
Just one. I hope not anymore.
And then with the mobile unit parked here, just kind of like this, then I got down behind the mobile unit, and it was like this.
Yeah,
door open, leaning out and looking and shooting.
Oh, it had to be chaotic.
It was not only chaotic in the sense of frenetic activity, it was chaotic in the sense of sound.
Yeah.
Because you had sirens roaring, you had gunshots being fired from up there and from down here firing back, and people screaming. And
wow.
It was just a mayhem of sound and heat and sight.
More shots being fired at the tower.
Charles Whitman was a troubled 24-year-old ex-Marine and an excellent marksman, killing with uncanny accuracy. Neil demonstrated just how lethal a sniper Whitman was.
Billy Speed was a police officer, and he was up here trying to get a vantage point up against the tower. Phil Miller from KTBC was behind him here. And as Billy Speed was moving around like this, now look at all this protection that he's got here. Charles Whitman was such an unbelievably good shot. He fired between these balustrades. One bullet hit right here, and then another shot hit Speed in the shoulder and chest here, and he tumbled down. And as he fell at this point, Phil Miller and several other people who were hiding behind this area as well reached over and pulled Speed out of the line of fire. Speed died of his wounds, the only police officer to be killed by Charles Whitman, but he died as a result of that, shooting from the tower down through this amazingly small space.
That is an incredible shot.
It's unreal to think that his marksmanship ability was that keen and that precise.
The sniper was well armed and apparently planned a long siege.
While revisiting our news studios, Neil related how the sniper murders impacted KTBC in a very personal way.
Paul Bolton was the first news director at Channel 7. Paul Bolton was the first news director for KTBC Radio. And he was the first face and voice to deliver broadcast journalism to this community. Well, that day, the story broke after he left, and we were sitting around at noon, and we heard the report on the air that there was a shooting at the tower, and then we began our coverage. Paul Bolton heard this at home and came rushing back in on his own, was in the studio working, doing whatever he could to help out, and we had the first report of casualties at Brackenridge Hospital. Joe started reading the list of names, and he went through the list. At that moment, as he wrapped up the list, Paul Bolton broke in and said, Joe, could you read that list of names again? I think you've got my grandson on that list. Everybody's interested. Could you please read it again? And Joe Roddy started reading the list again, and then he threw it back to the studio, and by that time, Jay Hodgson had already taken over the mic from Paul Bolton and said, yeah, Joe, we got it. Thank you very much. And he ushered Paul Bolton out of the studio. It was his grandson. It was his namesake grandson, Paul Bolton Sontag, and his grandson was killed along with his grandson's girlfriend, who were getting ready, going into the co-op to buy their books and supplies to begin their year as freshmen at the University of Texas. It was a tragic thing for Paul Bolton. Of course, we felt it throughout the KTBC family, because he was one of the first, if not the first, employee at KTBC back 50 years ago. And his tenure sort of really ended on a very, very tragic note during a very tragic day.
This is Neil Spells reporting from Austin.
Hi, I'm Carrie Schumacher. Programming for children has been a big part of KTBC's history. So big, in fact, that for 25 of our first 50 years, we had our own children's cartoon and variety show called The Uncle Jay Show. Thousands of kids who grew up in Austin during the 50s, 60s, and 70s appeared on the program and closely associate The Uncle Jay Show with warm memories of their childhood. We tracked down Jay, Uncle Jay Hodgson, to find out how this program that spanned decades all got started.
Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to the Uncle Jay Show.
Well, it started out just after we signed on. It originally was Mother's Delight, which ran for about 2 weeks, and it consisted of cartoons. Well, the cartoons never came out even. Some of them be 9 minutes long, some 4.5 minutes long, and so we couldn't make it a full 30 minutes, or 29:30. I was the announcer on duty at the time, and they put me on camera to introduce the cartoons and to fill the time to round it out to 29:30. Well, that went on for a week or so, and then they changed it to the Uncle Jay Show. That's how it started. I'd go out to a 3rd grade class, and we'd shoot film of the teacher and the classroom and the situation. And then when they came in on Monday, I'd do an interview with the teacher, and we'd show the film, and then we'd do all kinds of things on the program. And it was great fun. We had a spelling contest, we'd sing songs, we'd do show and tell. I went through about 5 or 6 costumes during the course of Uncle Jay. I didn't particularly like those white shoes. Matter of fact, I didn't like them at all. And a white belt too. But it was they were comfortable, so I didn't care.
All TV shows, like childhood, must one day come to an end, and in 1977, KTBC aired the last Uncle Jay show. Uncle Jay shares his views on children's programming of today.
I'm a little distressed that there aren't any live kid shows anymore because, well, they're too expensive. My way of thinking, when you can fill a television screen with an 8-year-old that is obviously having a good time, that is good television. They came to have a good time, and they did. And it showed. And I thought that was great television, which you don't see on television anymore in this whole country. And that's a shame.
Plenty of politics in KTBC's first 50 years. We've decided to focus on 3 presidents who left their mark on Texas. One of them, Lyndon Johnson, ruled the country from this desk, which now sits at his presidential library here at the University of Texas campus. Johnson, believe it or not, has plenty in common with George W. Bush. But we begin with Johnson's predecessor, who was on his way to Austin when he was assassinated.
We will carry the fight to the people in the fall, and we shall win.
It was no secret that President John F. Kennedy selected a brash senator from Texas as his vice presidential running mate, foremost as political strategy. 3 years in on the re-election campaign trail, Lyndon Baines Johnson brought Kennedy home, a campaign trip scheduled to end in Austin, a $100 a plate fundraiser at Palmer Auditorium, a reception at the governor's mansion, a tour of Johnson's TV station, KTBC, then a retreat to the vice president's ranch. But as anyone alive then remembers, a trip cut short by an assassin's bullet, shocking the country and altering the course of history.
People were already lining up on the highways in from Bergstrom Air Force Base to see President Kennedy. Members of the legislature had come to town to go to the reception.
And will to the best of my ability. And will to the best of my ability. Preserve. Protect. And defend. The Constitution of the United States. Constitution of the United States. So help me God. So help me God.
The lifelong politician from Texas suddenly had the weight of the free world thrust upon him.
Lyndon Johnson would have a difficult road ahead, maneuvering the country through Vietnam and the civil rights movement, steering the space program. He was the first of 2 presidents from Texas, both at opposite ends of the political spectrum, but both with plenty in common.
No words are strong enough to express our determination to continue the forward thrust of America that he began.
Left shouldering a national tragedy, Johnson was determined to move the country forward. In turn, Americans were sympathetic and elected him to a full term in 1964 with what is still the largest margin of victory in a presidential election.
I, Lyndon Baines Johnson, do solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute
He successfully passed many of Kennedy's initiatives and his own Great Society program, attacking crime, poverty, and disease. But it wasn't long before the realities of the era, especially sending more troops to Vietnam, divided the country and eroded his support. It became too much for Johnson to bear.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
I'm going to announce the formation of exploratory committee to determine whether or not I should seek the presidency.
30 years after LBJ left office, the next president from Texas began his ascent. George W. Bush, at the opposite end of the political spectrum, compared to Johnson, a political novice. But both men shared a similar strength that propelled them to succeed.
President Johnson was the absolute master in one-on-ones. He knew how to mobilize and work the Senate like probably no other leader has ever done before or since. Likewise, President Bush has the ability to charm an individual. Look what he did with the Capitol over here. Came in here as a Republican governor. He had a Democratic speaker, a Democratic lieutenant governor. Ended up charming both of them, becoming good personal friends.
Less than a year into his presidency, Bush, too, would face a national tragedy.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
And like a generation before, the country looked to its president to move forward.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
As Johnson took office with the nation rallied behind him, giving him wide latitude confronting Vietnam, similarly, Bush began the war on terror. Public support so high, the country so galvanized, both presidents had nowhere to go but down. For Johnson, Vietnam escalated and well into public view.
Public support for Vietnam faded as it got worse. The disillusionment grew as the problem grew.
So too did Bush's support when the war on terror shifted toward Iraq. 2 Texans thrust into the unforeseen, shouldering the weight of the world, and both leaning heavily on their shared roots as a source of strength for moving on.
President Johnson's greatest accomplishment was arguably his contribution to the civil rights movement, but he decided not to seek a second full term in office so he could devote all his time to peace negotiations in Vietnam. Indeed, when he left office in 1969, those negotiations were underway, and shortly after he died in January of '73, that peace came to fruition.
Over the last 50 years, severe weather has struck Central Texas and the Hill Country many times.
And as part of our 50th anniversary special, we'll look back at just a few of them. On May 24th, 1981, a storm hit Austin, which became known as the Memorial Day Flood. 5 to 11 inches of rain fell in a 3-hour period. Most of the damage happened along the banks of Shoal Creek in central Austin, where 16 homes were destroyed and 2 people drowned. Several businesses in the area were under 10 feet of water, including car dealers who lost over 300 new cars, and more than 700 homes were also damaged. A total of 13 lives were lost in the Memorial Day flood. Most of those deaths happened because people attempted to go through low water crossings.
10 years later, the flood of December 20th, 1991 became one of the worst in Austin's history. The rising water trapped many residents, and several people were rescued by fire, emergency medical services, and police departments. But thankfully, there were no deaths, unlike the 13 deaths in 1981.
On May 27, 1997, one of the most devastating tornadoes in United States history hit the small town of Jarrell in Williamson County. The F5 tornado killed 27 people and destroyed the Double Creek subdivision, tearing some houses completely off their foundations. The deadly tornado was so powerful it removed asphalt from roads, killed hundreds of cattle, stripped bark from trees, and pulled grass from the ground. Cars were also found a half-mile from where they were parked. The tornado hit Jarrell with winds over 261 miles per hour. The same storm produced softball-sized hail and an F3 tornado in Leander and Cedar Park. destroying an Albertsons grocery store. The manager of the store saved many lives that day by sending customers into the store's steel meat locker. Several homes in the area were damaged or destroyed, but thankfully no lives were lost. Northwest Austin was also in the path of the tornado that day. An F4 twister hit Lakeway with winds reaching 207 miles per hour. This tornado continued to move towards the southwest for about 8 more miles before crossing Highway 71 south of Briarcliff.
On October 17, 1998, more than 10.5 inches of rain pelted the Austin area. The Williamson Creek watershed flooded along its entire length. Police, fire, and EMS crews responded to 400 high water rescue calls and evacuated around 300 residents in 6 neighborhoods. More than 160 homes and businesses sustained some flood damage. The rain was brought in by twin Pacific hurricanes, Madeline and Lester. In Austin, 454 homes were damaged along Onion Creek, Walnut Creek, and Williamson Creek.
On November 15, 2001, flooding rains, strong winds, and even tornadoes hit areas of central Texas. The storms caused extensive flooding that damaged hundreds of homes and killed 10 people. The severe weather affected a large area, including the hill country. The storms also spawned several tornadoes in the Kyle and Buda area and western Hays County. The one in Buda blew out windows, toppled trees, damaged a gas station, knocked down a tower, and jackknifed a few 18-wheelers.
The intense downpours quickly swelled creeks and waterways, with streets turning into rivers. Firefighters rescued stranded motorists from cars bobbing in the water. There was major street flooding, especially in South Austin along Onion Creek and Shoal Creek. Evacuations were called for in several subdivisions in the area. The roof of the Montopolis Recreation Center on Austin's east side was torn apart by strong winds. The Blanco River in San Marcos swelled beyond its banks, forcing hundreds from their homes. In Austin, the Town Lake Animal Shelter was underwater after the Colorado River rose out of its banks. More than 300 dogs and cats had to be moved to higher ground. The shelter had flooded before, but never this badly. These flooding rains accounted for the wettest November on record at Austin Mabry and the second wettest for Austin Bergstrom.
For 8 days in late June and early July of 2002, 10 to 15 inches of rain fell in the hill country and central Texas. The floods caused 9 deaths and damaged close to 48,000 homes. Several roads were closed because of high water, but still numerous water rescues had to be performed. The storms created large amounts of runoff and a number of rivers surpassed flood stage, including the Brazos, Colorado, and the Guadalupe rivers. The good news with the storms was that the Edwards Aquifer, which was very low at the time, was completely recharged. Natural Bridge Caverns even found water in some caves that hadn't been there in years.
And that's a look back at just some of the extreme Central Texas weather events over the last 50 years.
You know, for the past 50 years, not all of the personalities have been in front of the camera. For 37 years, Herb Hansen was the ace television salesman, regaled everybody with his wit and his gentlemanly style. And guess what? He made KTBC a lot of money in the process. He's retired now, out in Georgetown, but he remembers fondly those years with Lady Bird.
Christmas parties were the ultimate. They spared nothing. And of course, the elegance and the whole thing, you could see the flavor of Miss Johnson in the whole party. It was always a huge buffet, ice sculptures, shrimp, food, you can name it. The bar was always open, but there was always a big orchestra. There was always an orchestra. And one of the things, too, that I'll always remember is at a certain time of the evening after everybody had been having fun and just before you would see the Secret Service walk in and the band would strike up Hail to the Chief. Memorable. You never forget that. Everybody getting up and him going through. That man, President Johnson, never missed dancing with a woman he danced with every woman. He never sat down. He had a good time. And Miss Johnson, oh, she was lovely on her feet. I mean, you know, she was a great dancer. And probably still is.
On the 5th floor of KTBC is the Johnson Suite, where Lyndon and Lady Bird often stayed during the 60s and 70s. Herbie tells the tale.
This was the president's house. This is where they lived when they were in town. It's where he came when his president, he would come to town, he'd stay here. They entertained here. We used to bring clients up for lunch. Had some of the best meals I ever had in my life, and everything was homemade, everything. Secret Service men would be stationed in that foyer. They'd be on the roof, a roof across the way there. And one of my favorite stories is that every morning when the president got on the elevator to go down, it seemed like I was always on the elevator. And I always look at him and say, looking at the Secret Service man, I said, Mr. President, sure it's hard to find good help, isn't it? And it would crack him up. So he really did. President Johnson really had a sense of humor. A lot of people didn't see that, but he was a fun man, yeah.
This is Dave Cody, and I've had the privilege of being sports director at KTBC FOX 7 for 17 years. You know, since that first Longhorn football broadcast more than 5 decades ago, KTBC's had a unique relationship with the University of Texas. During the national championship years of the 60s and 70s, KTBC aired the Coach Darrell Royal Show, which aired every Sunday morning in the fall. We sat down with the Texas football legend and asked him about his memories of that program hosted by Cactus Pryor.
It's hard to describe anything as typical when you're doing it with Cactus Pryor. I remember I used to go in there with coat and tie, and I had shorts on and tennis shoes down below the desk that we were sitting, but I always had my coat and tie on. So one day, just unknown to me, Cactus said, "Get up." Coach said, "Come over here a minute." Said, "I think the people ought to see how you dress to come for this TV show."
And I read that article about Coach Royal being such a natty dresser. And I said, "Coach, step out in front of the desk here with me." So we stood up there with a bare knee showing, dressed to the zenith upstairs, but downstairs nothing.
He had me walk out there in tennis shoes and shorts with a sport coat and tie on. And
I said, "Now, folks, you see what a natty dresser he is?" And he said, looking at my knee, he said, "Well, you ain't Mr. Sunshine yourself, you know."
He would do things like that, but it was always right. It was always a good thing to do. It was, you know, it created some talk, and people said, "Gosh, I had no idea." Well, I was dressed to go to work.
I came in with a wishbone and started at the very bottom of the wonderful pinnacle that was created with the wishbone. And I was just in hog heaven, man. I didn't even have to pay. They paid me. I couldn't believe it. And I traveled with them, flew with them wherever they went. But working with Darrell was such a wonderful experience. Never once did we discuss beforehand what we were going to discuss on the air. Just throw it at me, throw it at me.
But I didn't know what he was going to ask, and I didn't want to know what he was going to ask, because I would rather react than to act like he's canned, you know. It would be canned if I'd have known what he's going to ask. And I don't think he knew. I think his mind worked from a response that I just made would lead him into the next question. And of course, he talked to fans and different people around. He knew what they were interested in. So it was really great to do the show with Cactus.
The Longhorns honored Coach Darrell Royal for his years of service and 3 national championships by attaching his name to Memorial Stadium. And since 1996, the Longhorns have played football at Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium. We asked Coach Royal to reflect on a crowning moment in his career, coaching the 1969 Game of the Century at Arkansas.
Arkansas had a great team anyway. They were undefeated too, remember. They were number 2 in the nation. That was 1 and 2 that was playing. That wasn't 1 and 20. It was 1 and 2 that were playing in that game. So we had our hands full on any kind of day playing them. The weather didn't bother me a bit, because I thought we were evenly matched to begin with. See, we were 14-0 behind going into the 4th quarter and had not moved the ball. We were confused with the defense that they were running, and our first score came when James Street goes back to pass, and he scrambled about 65 yards for a touchdown on a pass that didn't have any open receivers. We had 4th and 3 somewhere around midfield. I've forgotten exactly the field position, but we hadn't moved the ball and time was running out. We didn't have time to run a running play, barely make a first down, and keep grinding it out in for a score, which we hadn't been successful to do all day. To me, it was time to gamble, and I knew it was a huge gamble.
Coach Royal, out of nowhere, says we'll run right 53 veer pass. Now, Coach Campbell was standing there listening to it, and he honestly just turned around and hollered, "Defense, get ready." And I always use that in a joke, and he had seen me pass, and he knew we were really in trouble then.
Almost crucial 4th down play again for the Longhorns at their own 43.5.
First time I looked up and saw the ball, I thought, I'll never catch that. I thought it was way over my head. As I looked over my shoulder and the ball dropped, I guess 6 inches from their hand, just dropped right in my hands. Perfect pass. Couldn't have been any better.
If it'd been up to, I guess if it'd been up to all the assistant coaches, we would not have thrown that pass. But Darrell had a feeling about it.
Had that play been unsuccessful, it would have probably been the most criticized call that I could have ever made, and I would have gone down in history of blowing a national championship.
But you don't have time to think about all that when you're on the sideline. You think what we need to do at the moment, which I thought was gamble. We've got to gamble, and this would be a good gamble.
Current UT football coach Mack Brown has been carving out his own legacy here on the 40 acres. But 3 years ago, the fierce rivalry between the Texas Longhorns and the A&M Aggies was tempered forever by a bonfire tragedy. We asked Coach Brown to share his thoughts on how the deaths of so many young football fans affected him, the Longhorns, and UT football tradition.
I can remember driving to work that Thursday morning and hearing on the radio that there's been a tragedy. The bonfire had collapsed and that there's some young people who have lost their lives and some others that are missing. And as a parent, I can remember them saying, call 1-800 so to try to find out if your child's okay. And I thought, what an awful thing for a parent. And I'm an hour and 45 minutes away. If I'm trying to drive to find out if my child's okay, that's the longest hour and 45 minutes in your life. And then they came back on and said that the lines are jammed to a point that we can't get through, so you need to drive and find out. And I'm an emotional person, but I pulled off on the side of the road and started crying. And I called Sally immediately, and I worried about our children, and that's what you do. And then I felt so bad. You know, how do you think about a football game when a child's lost their life, and you think about those parents and their friend? And I felt so bad, and again, Sally helped so much, because I said, what do we do? You know, I feel helpless here. We're talking about practicing to beat a team when they've lost children. And her point was so good, and she said, well, let's figure out something we could do to help the kids that are alive. We can't do anything except support the parents of the children that are gone. So that's when she started talking about the blood drive, and I thought the 2 or 3 things that happened during that week have been part of the change in my life since I've been here. The blood drive was wonderful. Gosh, there were lines with orange and maroon and from Southwest Texas and Baylor, and people didn't care. You know, they gave up their loyalties to their school to be loyal to those kids who needed blood. Coming over here for our Hex rally, it wasn't a Hex rally. You know, it was a memorial service for those kids, and to see all the A&M students with our students talking about kids and not talking about the game was really emotional for me again. And they asked me to speak, and I really didn't want to, but I was convinced that they needed me to speak. And maybe it was good for me to get some of the emotion out. And then I didn't do a very good job coaching that week, because I really wasn't sure that we should be playing a game. And it's because I've got really good friends that have lost children, and I thought the focus should be on those kids and those families, not some football game. And so I don't think I did a very good job for our players. And so many people were asking the kids, how are you going to try? How are you going to play? It's better for them to win, isn't it? Because it'll help those parents and those kids. And I thought it put our kids in a real difficult position. And then last, I stayed at home Friday night. Major was sick, and I think it's just a horrible week of all kinds. About half our receivers are out of the game. And then to see thousands of people coming out in support of the families that lost those kids, and seeing the thousands of people in the stadium. And I'm not sure it was a pep rally for the game, a yell practice, as much as it was to say, we all need to pull together here. This is tough on everybody. And I thought the game, and A&M won, they played great in the second half and played very emotional, but I thought it was kind of anticlimactic for the week. And I still think about those parents a whole lot, especially after we lost Cole Pittman. And I worry about those parents a whole lot, because what an awful thing around Thanksgiving, every time that date comes up and this game comes up, there are at least 12 families that are sad. And that's very, very difficult for me to think about the week of that game.
I'm Dennis Delapena, and I've been with KTBC for 3 years now, but as an Austin native and a Texas ex, I've been following UT athletics for quite some time. That includes watching one of the best collegiate baseball programs in the nation right here at Dishwalk Field, a program coming off its 5th national championship, its first under head coach Augie Garrido.
It is the richest tradition in college baseball. I think the most accurate comparison is at the college baseball level. We are the New York Yankees of college baseball. We've won more championships, 79 conference championships, 29 appearances at the College World Series, and 5 national championships. It's a record unsurpassed by any other school.
Light the tower orange! The Texas Longhorns are coming home as college baseball's national champions!
Well, it was a feeling of joy. I think the expressions on the players' faces, their body language, the overwhelming joy that they had in winning, recognizing the sacrifices they made, the way they played the game, the way they handled themselves off the field.
That included their season-capping visit to the White House.
Congratulations.
The UT baseball program, back in the national limelight, 19 years after that 1983 title, one of 2 under coaching legend Cliff Gustafson.
Well, I'm very thrilled. I really am. I thought in '75 when we won it for the first time under my coaching, that was the greatest thrill that I could ever experience, but it was no greater than this one. It was just, I can't express my feelings, you know. It's such a great thrill, and everybody's just, the whole team, I don't know, man, it's one of those things. They had a never say die spirit, which I've never seen before.
You have in Coach Gustafson one of the legendary coaches of all time in college baseball. And the tradition that was set by Coach Gus and Billy Dish and Bib Falk is a lot to live up to. And that was part of the challenge for me. We have a new period of time. We have successfully moved through the transition, and in the last 3 years we've been to Omaha twice, we've won a national championship, and the program is alive and well.
Also alive and well are the other UT athletic programs KTBC has covered the past 50 years. That includes the storied men's golf program. Almost a dozen former Horns are currently on the PGA and senior tours. That includes Austin natives Ben Crenshaw and Tom Kite, 2 living golf legends still proud to call Austin home.
I don't know about legend. That's kind of a stretch as far as I'm concerned, but certainly the people in Austin have been very supportive of my career and everything that I've done, you know, all the way back to junior high school and of course at the University of Texas.
We root for the Horns always, no matter what they do, and we still live in Austin, so that part of that equation will always be there, and we're proud of what we have achieved at the University of Texas. We've been lucky enough to do something for the school, but we'd like to see that continue.
When KTBC first began broadcasting 50 years ago, the very first image the viewers of Central Texas saw was of the man sitting across from me, Mr. Cactus Pryor. Welcome home, Cactus.
Thank you. Yeah, I figured to put my face on first, and from then on it'd be an improvement.
Well, 10 years after that first telecast, you remember it very well. KTBC had outgrown its studio space inside the Driscoll Hotel and moved into our current location at 10th and Brazos. To celebrate this event, Channel 7 created an hour-long TV special hosted by, who else? Mr. Pryor. So tell us a little bit about this program, what we're going to see, Cactus.
And you can't call me Khaki Poo.
Okay. Mr. Khaki Poo, right?
Well, we were just in hog heaven because we had been in very cramped quarters. Matter of fact, we started out at the transmitter, then to the Driscoll, then to here. It was just like dying and going to heaven, all of this space. And so I took the camera on a crew of the whole shebang, started on the third floor, I think it was, second, and then the studio, and explain television and how it worked to the people, because it was still a really relatively new thing.
Yeah, it was a novelty, and it was a stroll down memory lane for you. Well, Cactus, to mark our 50th birthday, here's a look back at KTBC yesterday and today.
I'm Cactus Pryor, and this is home, KTBC Radio and Television at 10th and Brazos. Come on in, we'll show you around. But first, I'd like to show you this mosaic, of which we're very proud. It was created by Paul Hatgill and Michael Frary, and depicts various Austin architecture. We're very proud of it. I think it's one of the most beautiful mosaics we've ever seen.
And we still do. And with the newfangled color cameras that we have, you can see the myriad of colors in this beautiful mosaic here.
This is a KTBC newsroom, and this is Paul Bolton, news editor of both KTBC Radio and Television. Life to Paul is a constant series of deadlines. Let's see if we can catch him between a couple of them now. Paul, we'd like you to meet the city of Austin.
I believe we've met.
Yes. We're taking a little tour of the facilities, and I wonder if you'd show us how the newsroom functions.
Well, how much time do I have, Cactus?
Oh, you got a few minutes.
Just a few minutes. Over there. Well, I think we should start with our news sources, and of course, first of all, here we get tips on stories from state police and from city police, and of course, we have constant communication with our mobile unit, Red Rover. At this time, newsman Jay Hodgson, sitting over here, is taking a report on a fire which occurred just a few moments ago. He's talking with the owner of the establishment which suffered this fire this morning. Then, of course, our second source of news are the news wires, the news machines, which are in this closet. There are 3 of them in there. Newsman Hal Nelson is now looking over the radio wires. We have 3 wires in there. One is a newspaper news wire. The second is the weather and state police wire. And the third, a radio news wire.
It's gotten a little more advanced in the past 40 years. In addition to the reporters and cameramen, KTBC employs dozens of videotape operators, satellite feed recorders, assignment editors, and news producers around the clock. We did a great job keeping Austin informed in the old days, and we still do. We just don't make our employees stand in the closet anymore. This is Cactus Pryor, Thermos Rock and Mortimer.
I'm Bill Moyers, and I'm delighted at this chance to say happy anniversary to KTBC. Actually, it's like saying happy anniversary to myself, because I started my career in broadcast journalism right there almost half a century ago. It was after my sophomore year at North Texas State. I had the good fortune of landing a summer job working on Senator Lyndon Johnson's staff in Washington. As the summer came to a close, I was preparing to return to North Texas State when LBJ suggested I transfer to the University of Texas and work for Lady Bird's radio and television station. This meant a steady job that would enable Judith and me to get married, although both of us were also full-time students. The Johnsons offered me $100 a week, a lot of money in those days for a poor kid from East Texas, more money, in fact, than my father ever made in a week of his life. So I came to Austin, walked into KTBC, introduced myself to Jesse Kellen, the general manager, and told him the Johnsons had sent me. He said, "Oh yes, we've been expecting you. Go sign up with payroll." I went around, signed up, and noticed on the form that I was scheduled to be paid only $1 an hour. Not only was that not what I'd been told in Washington, but I couldn't afford to get married unless I worked 100 hours a week, which I later realized is what LBJ expected. So I trotted back to the office of Jesse Kellen, the general manager, and said, "There's been a misunderstanding here." He said, "Oh no, that's our top wage." I told him I was expecting $100 a week. "We never pay that much to a first-time employee," he said. I said, "Give me a few minutes, I'll call Mrs. Johnson." He looked up at me and said, "You'll call Bird?" "Yes, sir," I said, "I'll call Mrs. Johnson." He said, "I'll call her, you go wait in the hall." I fully expected to have to wait to call my fiancée and tell her to start packing. But Jesse Kellen came out in a few minutes, shook my hand and said, "I talked to Bird. She said, we're people of our word. You get the $100. That's how it happened. Of course, I almost blew it later, literally. Cactus Pryor and I were always making life hard for each other with our practical jokes. He'd got me on one, and so I sought revenge. I took one of those big granddaddy firecrackers, a huge thing with a thick fuse, and I emptied the powder out of it so it wouldn't really explode. I waited until Cactus was right in the middle of his monologue, opened the door to his little studio, lit the fuse, and threw the thing squarely under his feet. Unfortunately, I had not quite emptied all the powder, and there was this big explosion with a lot of smoke. Cactus came straight out of his chair. I even think his toupee came off. And although he was live on the air, he bolted out of the studio and started chasing me, his face writhing with fury. I raced out the door with Cactus in hot pursuit. He chased me around the corner, all the way down to Congress Avenue and past Scarborough's department store, although he wasn't closing the distance on me. Suddenly he stopped. It hit him. He'd left a live broadcast and all those undelivered commercials. He wheeled and raced back to pick up his monologue as if nothing had happened for those 10 minutes. I thought my career in journalism would come to an end right there, but later we had a good laugh, made up, and nothing eventful happened until I got my next paycheck for $1 an hour. It was a great life, those 2 years, working with people like Cactus, and serving as assistant news editor for the legendary Paul Bolton. Those years gave me a building block in journalism that's been there ever since. We were the first station in Texas, by the way, to buy a station wagon, paint it red, and christen it, what else? Red Rover. I wheeled around town in style, broadcasting from accidents and crime scenes and the state legislature, which in Texas was the biggest crime scene of all. What a send-off. Happy anniversary, KTBC.
Thank you for joining us in our celebration of 50 great years of KTBC broadcasting. And we all hope you'll keep it right here on Fox 7 for many more years to come. Good night.
Fox 7 at 50 has been made possible by the generous support of 3M, Alcoa, and Matt's Famous El Rancho.